Hey, what's going on, team? So, food addiction, is that a real thing? I was listening to a debate between two very well-known neuroscientists. One, Dr. Paul Fletcher from Cambridge, and then also named Dr. Paul, but Dr. Paul Kenny from the Department of Neuroscience at a university in New York. And one was arguing that food addiction is a real thing, and one was arguing that it was not. And I'd like to share kind of their thoughts and what my own personal thoughts are on the matter. So one of the biggest cons that food was not addicting came from, I believe it was Dr. Paul Fletcher, saying that they really haven't been able to identify an ingredient in food that would be considered addictive. They haven't been able to isolate that. Like with heroin, they can isolate, okay, this is the addictive substrate, or with cocaine and so on and so forth. I guess what I would go on to say, and what Dr. Paul Kenny went on to say in rebuttal for that, is we have created food. So food scientists have literally created new foods through the hydrogenations of fats. They've changed the molecular component of the fat. Combining fat and sugar into a food, you can't see that in nature. That's a hyperpalatable food. You can get all fat foods in nature, like say an avocado, which is nearly all fat, or you can get all sugar foods in nature, say like a honeycomb or honey. But you're never going to see them combined together. So that creates a hyperpalatable effect, is that combination of fat and sugar. The hyperpalatable effect, you might think of, okay, well, what does that mean, hyperpalatable? Think of if you could eat as much as you want. So you as much as you want, and I got 10 steaks in front of you. And I love steak. But probably after my second steak, I'm just I'm good. Or say if you're really into avocados, you eat a whole avocado, you're probably not going to keep smashing one after another. Where if I put a hyperpalatable food in you, a combination of high fat and high sugar, so say grandma's cookies in front of you, nice and warm, drizzling with the hot the melted chocolate chips, we tend to not have an off switch there. I mean, if we were just said, hey, you could have as many as you want, you're probably going to eat a lot more. They've done studies that you would eat a lot more calories from that hyperpalatable food, even though the other food like steak, avocado, whatever it might be, is calorically dense, and it's also something that you really like. You're going to eat a lot more calories of the hyperpalatable food. So that would be the first thing, is we have addictive properties as shown in those hyperpalatability studies. So the other thing I would look at is isolated foods. So, for example, high fructose corn syrup would be an isolated food, or a lot of artificial sweeteners. They're 50 times, some 100 times sweeter than actual sugar. Well, what scientists have found, is because they're so highly concentrated, when we kind of step down to natural sugar sources, so for example, eat an apple or a blueberry or some fruit, they just don't seem as, we're kind of desensitized. We're like, oh, this doesn't taste like, the yogurt that I like to buy with the high fructose corn syrup in it, or this doesn't taste like, the Splenda filled, Crystal Light supplement. In other words, it's a lot sweeter. So when we isolate these foods down, they tend to make us not be really impressed with naturally sweetened food that we find in nature. So we tend to gravitate more towards those isolated foods. Now, does that make them addictive? No, but because they're so much sweeter, that I would at least argue that they have more addictive properties. For example, if you're going to choose between a fruit, which has a lot of micronutrients and a lot of nutritional density into it, and then something flavored with high fructose corn syrup, you're probably going to choose the high fructose corn syrup from a taste perspective, and then you're going to lose out a lot of the fiber and micronutrients from the isolated food. Okay, so the third, and this would probably be the strongest punch that I would say that foods definitely can be addictive, is the dopamine release. So dopamine is typically a movement hormone. Okay, we work out, our body releases dopamine, and we feel great. Okay, or we go on a run, you get that runner's high that they talk about, and your dopamine's released, and you feel great. Well, they've compared brain scans of people that have just done cocaine or other catecholamines or amphetamines, and the brain scans of people with high dose sugar that just had high dose sugar, and they both light up like light bulbs, is from a dopamine perspective. So that is an actual physiological response. So if I'm kind of down in the dumps, I'm just not feeling like moving off the couch, and I kind of want to feel that happy hormone, that happy neurotransmitter, that get that dopamine rush, I can go and have a high sugar food and get that immediate self-gratification from that food, get that kind of happy. Now, they've also found that long-term sugar consumption changes the gene expression. So for what that means is long-term high-dose sugar, you kind of need more and more. So you get that immediate dopamine release, and then the next time not as much, then the next time not as much. So it kind of makes you crave more, and more. And meanwhile, we're gaining more and more weight, and then type 2 diabetes comes up, and so on and so forth. So I would definitely kind of maybe meet in the middle and say that there are absolutely addictive properties to foods, and we want to live in harmony with food, but just understanding that maybe we need to cut back our artificial sweetener, because we know that the artificial sweetener is going to lower our desire for natural sweeteners or foods that are more micronutrient dense, or just being aware. A lot of it could just be being aware of it. I would definitely make the case that that high fructose corn syrup, hydrogenated fats really have no place in our diet. Hyperpalatable foods, I eat hyperpalatable foods. Toll House cookies would be a great example of a hyperpalatable food, high fat, high sugar. But again, just having that awareness, knowing, okay, this is a hyperpalatable food, not nutrient dense. It's going to have addictive properties to it. Okay, so going to that food, if our mood is off balance or whatnot, that may not be the greatest food to go to. And then we kind of want to talk about, like, from a holistic standpoint, or from a macro or big picture standpoint, our gut microbiome. If our gut microbiome is out of whack, and it's kind of making us anxious, it's making us have low dopamine perception, or we're not wanting to move as much, okay, well, that would be a really, really good time that someone would go to food. And that's, I think, where the addiction comes into play. Is, again, it's more of a big picture thinking. So the gut microbiome's out of whack. We're feeling tired. We're feeling moody. We're feeling anxious. We're not feeling ourselves, because it's out of whack. And then what we do is we go and we have these hyperpalatable foods for that quick, maybe that dopamine release, which further destroys our gut microbiome. And then it becomes a vicious cycle. So now it's like, hey, to feel good, I need that food again the next day. Or to feel good, I need that food again the day after that, and so forth. And that's where, when we start to become reliant on those hyperpalatable foods, because we're not dealing, the hyperpalatable foods is just addressing the symptom, and it's making the cause worse. You know what I mean? So a lot of times that cause is an unbalanced gut health. So that's a totally different topic. But yeah, so is food addictive? I think was the question that we sought out to answer. I would absolutely agree that there are addictive properties to food, and I do think that certain foods can be addictive in the right circumstances. And again, having a wrecked microbiome, or a poor microbiome, or poor gut health would definitely be one of those circumstances. So hopefully this helps increase your awareness, and this is something that you can kind of let permeate, and just, again, be awareness. I think awareness is knowledge. Knowledge is power, and now we're empowered to go and make the right decisions and maybe look at our food in a little bit different way. You all have a fantastic evening.